Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I need to tell someone about what happened with our downstairs neighbor because the police won't do anything, and I'm losing my mind. We're a pretty normal family. Me, my wife Jenna, and our 2 kids who were 7 and 4 at the time. I worked nights at a warehouse distribution center in Cincinnati, while Jenna stayed home with the children. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor of this old brick building from the 60s, one of those places with 8 units, creaky wooden floors, and windows that rattled whenever a truck rumbled past. We'd lived there for about 3 years without any real issues, just the occasional maintenance problem, and thin walls that let you hear too much of everyone else's business. Most of our neighbors were friendly enough, the kind where you'd chat about the weather while checking your mail, but the guy directly below us, Mr. Garrett, always kept his distance. Heavy-set man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair, and he had this peculiar habit of wearing the same faded blue coveralls every single day, like he'd just clocked out from some factory that shut down 20 years ago. The weird stuff started small, almost easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. One Saturday afternoon, we came back from grocery shopping to find our front door unlocked. Jenna insisted she'd locked it, and I believed her because she was the type to check the knob twice before walking away. We brushed it off, figured maybe one of us got distracted with the kids arguing about who got to push the cart or something. Then the next week, same thing with the door. But this time our kitchen window was cracked open about 2 inches. That window faced the dumpster area, and we never opened it, especially not in early spring when it was still chilly. Our coffee maker had migrated from its spot next to the toaster to the opposite counter, and the kids' artwork on the refrigerator looked different, like someone had taken them down and put them back up in new positions. These weren't huge violations, but Jenna and I exchanged that look married couples get when they both realize something's not adding up. We started keeping a notebook, writing down every strange occurrence. The bathroom faucet we always made sure to turn off completely would be dripping when we got home. Our bedroom closet door, which we kept closed because the kids liked to play hide and seek in there and mess up our clothes, would be wide open. The worst part was this smell that would hit us randomly, like someone had been smoking cheap cigars mixed with some kind of industrial cleaner. It would linger in different rooms, strongest near the heating vents. Jenna found her grandmother's jewelry box, which she kept on our dresser, turned completely around facing the wall. Nothing was missing, but someone had definitely been handling it because her rings were in the wrong compartments. I installed one of those chain locks on our door, the kind hotels have, thinking that would solve the problem. We even changed our routine, started coming home at different times to throw off anyone who might be watching our schedule. About 3 weeks into this madness, I decided to come home early from my shift. Told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't exactly a lie considering the stress was eating me alive. I parked around the corner instead of our usual spot and walked up the back stairwell real quiet. When I got to our floor, I heard footsteps inside our apartment. Slow, deliberate, like someone taking their time. My key was already in my hand when I heard our door click shut. I rushed around the corner just in time to see Mr. Garrett's door closing on the floor below. The hallway still had that same chemical and cigar smell hanging in the air. I stood there for a good minute, trying to process what just happened, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I finally went inside our apartment, our mail was spread out on the kitchen table, sorted into neat little piles, and every single cabinet door in the kitchen was standing open. I called Jenna immediately, told her to keep the kids at her mother's house for the night. Then I marched straight down to Mr. Garrett's door and pounded on it until my fist hurt. I could hear his TV through the door, some game show with canned laughter, and I knew he was in there. After about 5 minutes, he finally opened up, but only as far as the chain would allow. His face appeared in the gap, sweaty and blotchy, with these watery blue eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. He was wearing those same coveralls, and up close I could smell that exact combination of stale cigar and chemical cleaner coming from his apartment. I asked him point blank if he'd been in our place, and he just stared at me with this blank expression, like I was speaking a foreign language. Then he said, real slow and deliberate, that he didn't know what I was talking about, that he'd been home all day watching his programs. Before I could say another word, he shut the door in my face. I heard multiple locks clicking into place, way more than any normal person would need. That night I barely slept, sitting in our living room with a baseball bat across my lap, listening to every creak and groan of the building. Around 3 a.m, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and measured, stopping right outside our door. The footsteps just stayed there for what must have been 10 minutes, not moving, not trying the handle, just standing. I crept to the peephole but couldn't see anyone. They were standing just outside the field of view. Then I heard breathing, heavy and ragged, right up against our door. The chain lock rattled slightly, like someone was testing it from the outside. I grabbed my phone to record it, but as soon as the camera app opened with that little clicking sound, the footsteps hurried away. When I finally worked up the nerve to crack the door open and peek out, the hallway was empty except for a wet rag on our doormat, soaked in something that burned my nostrils when I got close to it. The next morning I went straight to the landlord's office with Jenna. Mr. Thompson, this skinny guy in his 70s who always wore suspenders and smelled like mothballs, listened to our story while clicking his pen repeatedly against his desk. He told us Mr. Garrett had been there for 15 years, never missed rent, never caused problems. When we insisted someone had been entering our apartment, he just shrugged and said we had no proof it was Garrett, that maybe we were being forgetful with the kids and all. He wouldn't change our locks without charging us, and he definitely wasn't going to confront a long-term tenant based on accusations. As we were leaving his office, he mentioned something that made my skin prickle. He said Garrett used to be the building's maintenance man years ago, before they hired an outside company. The man still had a master key from those days, claimed he'd lost it, but Thompson never bothered getting the locks changed because Garrett was such a reliable tenant. We called the police that afternoon, and 2 officers showed up about 3 hours later looking bored before we even started talking. They took notes while we explained everything, but I could see the skepticism in their faces when we couldn't show them anything stolen or broken. The younger cop, this kid who looked fresh out of academy with his perfectly pressed uniform, actually suggested we might be experiencing shared delusions from stress. The older one at least went downstairs to talk to Garrett, but came back up after 5 minutes saying the man denied everything and seemed confused by the accusations. They gave us a case number and told us to call if anything else happened, but made it clear that without evidence of forced entry or stolen property, there wasn't much they could do. As they were leaving, I noticed Garrett standing at the bottom of the stairwell, just watching us with this satisfied expression, like he knew exactly how this would play out. Things escalated fast after the police visit. The next day, our car had all 4 tires deflated. Not slashed, just the air let out, so technically no vandalism. When I was filling them back up at the gas station, I found sugar poured into the gas tank. The mechanic said we were lucky we didn't try to start it. That same evening, Garrett started having people over, which he'd never done in the 3 years we'd lived there. These weren't normal guests either, rough-looking guys with neck tattoos and motorcycles who'd park right behind our car, blocking us in. They'd sit on the front steps drinking and talking loud until 2 or 3 in the morning, always glancing up at our windows when we peeked through the curtains. Jenna found a dead pigeon on our doormat one morning, its neck twisted completely around. The kids were asking why we couldn't go outside to play anymore, why Mommy was crying so much, why we had to be so quiet all the time. We started finding those chemical-soaked rags wedged into our bathroom vent while we slept, filling the apartment with fumes that made us dizzy and nauseous. I tried confronting Garrett again, this time with my phone recording in my pocket. He answered the door immediately, like he'd been waiting, and this time he didn't bother with the chain. He stood there in those filthy coveralls, smiling with teeth that were brown from tobacco, and told me real calm that he'd lived in this building longer than anyone, that he knew every pipe, every wire, every way in and out. He said sometimes people who don't belong somewhere start having accidents, kitchen fires, gas leaks, that sort of thing. Then he leaned in close enough that I could smell his rancid breath and whispered that my kids sure were pretty, that it would be a shame if something happened while I was at work and Jenna was all alone with them. He knew our schedules, knew when I left for my night shifts, knew what school the kids went to, knew what playground they used. He'd been watching us for years, collecting information, waiting for some perceived slight to give him a reason. We called the police again, played them the recording from my pocket, but the audio was muffled and hard to make out. They said it wasn't enough for a restraining order, that his words could be interpreted different ways, that we needed more concrete evidence of threats or harassment. The officer actually suggested we consider moving if we felt unsafe, like it was that simple to just pack up and leave when we could barely afford the deposit on a new place. That night we found our door lock had been superglued while we were inside, trapping us until I could get the super to drill it out the next morning. Garrett's biker friends started following Jenna when she drove the kids to school, staying just far enough behind to avoid being called tailgating. We'd see them at the grocery store, at the park, always watching, never quite doing anything illegal enough for the cops to care. The chemical smell was getting stronger in our apartment, seeping through vents we didn't even know existed, and both kids developed persistent coughs that wouldn't go away. The breaking point came on a Friday night when I was at work. Jenna called me hysterical, saying she'd woken up to find Garrett standing in our bedroom doorway, just silhouetted against the hall light, watching her sleep. She screamed and he walked out calm as could be, didn't run, didn't hurry, just strolled out like he had every right to be there. The police came again, found our front door lock had been picked, finally had their evidence of breaking and entering. They arrested Garrett that night, but he posted bail the next morning. We packed what we could fit in our car and left that same day, stayed with Jenna's mother for 2 months while we found a new place 3 towns over. We broke our lease, lost our security deposit, had to borrow money for a new apartment. The landlord actually had the nerve to threaten us with legal action for abandoning the property. We never went back for the rest of our stuff. Sometimes I drive by that old building and I swear I can see him in his window, those same coveralls, just waiting for the next family to move in upstairs. The police told us the case was dropped due to insufficient evidence since we wouldn't return to testify. We just wanted it over, wanted our kids to sleep through the night again without asking if the bad man was coming back. It was early October when I moved into that rental room on Willow Avenue, just outside of Portland. I'd just landed a job at a medical billing company downtown, and after weeks of searching, I finally found this affordable room in a quiet suburban house owned by an elderly couple, the Johnsons. They lived on the main floor while I had a cozy room upstairs with its own entrance through the back stairs. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, kids riding bikes, people walking their dogs in the evening. I remember feeling lucky to have found such a peaceful spot, especially after living in a noisy apartment complex near campus for the past 4 years. The Johnsons were sweet, always checking if I needed anything, and their cat, a massive orange tabby named Clementine, would sometimes sneak up to my room and curl up on my bed while I worked from home on Fridays. The first few weeks were uneventful, almost boring in that comfortable suburban way. I'd wake up at 6:30, make coffee in my tiny kitchenette, and head to work. Evenings were for jogging around the neighborhood or reading on the small balcony attached to my room. It was during one of those evening jogs, about 3 weeks after moving in, that I first really noticed the house next door. The paint was peeling off the siding. The grass was overgrown with dandelions taking over what used to be flower beds, and there were always different cars parked in the driveway, beat-up sedans that would appear for a day or two then vanish. The mailbox was stuffed so full that envelopes were falling onto the ground. But what really caught my attention was the woman sitting on the front steps, smoking and staring directly at me as I jogged past. She had stringy blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks, wore an oversized flannel shirt despite the warm evening, and her eyes had this hollow, desperate quality that made me pick up my pace. A few days later, I was carrying groceries from my car when she appeared at the fence separating our properties. "Hey, neighbor," she called out, her voice raspy and too loud. "I'm Diane. Been living here for 8 years, never seen you before." Her fingers gripped the chain-link fence, knuckles white, and I noticed her nails were bitten down to the quick with dried blood around the edges. I introduced myself politely, trying to balance my grocery bags while maintaining some distance. She immediately launched into this rapid-fire monologue about how her ex-husband had left her with nothing, how the government was screwing her over with disability payments, how her daughter never visited anymore. The words tumbled out in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. She kept stepping closer to the fence, and I could smell something sour on her breath even from several feet away. Then, without any transition, she asked if I could lend her $40 for groceries, said she'd pay me back on Friday when her check came in. Before I could respond, Mr. Johnson appeared on our back porch, calling out that he needed help moving something inside. I'd never been more grateful for an interruption. I apologized to Diane, said I had to go, and practically ran toward the house. As I reached the porch, Mr. Johnson pulled me aside, his usually cheerful face serious. "You need to be careful with her," he said quietly, glancing toward the fence where Diane still stood watching us. "She's been trouble for years. Last month she borrowed Peggy's car from across the street, said it was just for a grocery run, and didn't bring it back for 3 days. Peggy found it abandoned at a gas station 20 miles away with an empty tank and fast food wrappers everywhere. He told me that Diane had a pattern. She'd be friendly at first, find out everything about you, then the requests would start. Small things initially, then bigger asks, and if you refused, she could turn nasty. The previous tenant, a college kid named Brandon, had moved out after just 2 months because Diane wouldn't stop knocking on his door at all hours, demanding rides to places or asking to use his phone. For the next couple of weeks, I managed to avoid any real interaction with Diane. I'd see her through my window sometimes, pacing her backyard while talking loudly on her phone, gesturing wildly at no one. Other times she'd be sitting on her porch with different people, rough-looking men with neck tattoos, women who seemed just as strung out as she was. They'd argue frequently, voices carrying through the thin walls between our houses. I started wearing headphones constantly, even when I wasn't listening to anything, just to have an excuse to ignore her if she tried to talk to me. But she was persistent. She'd appear at the fence whenever I came home from work, always with a new crisis. Her electricity was about to be shut off. Her medication had been stolen. She needed a ride to the pharmacy. Each time I'd make up an excuse. I was late for something, I had a work call, I wasn't feeling well. I could see her getting more agitated with each rejection, her friendly mask slipping just a little more. Then came that Wednesday evening in late October. I'd just gotten home from a particularly stressful day at work, dealing with insurance claims and angry patients. All I wanted was to heat up some leftover pasta and watch Netflix in peace. I was halfway up my back stairs when I heard her voice behind me. "Hey, wait up." Diane was standing at the bottom of my stairs. She'd actually come through the gate into our backyard. She looked worse than usual, her hair greasy and matted, wearing the same stained sweatpants I'd seen her in for the past 3 days. Her pupils were like pinpoints, and she kept scratching at her arms, leaving red marks on her pale skin. "I really need your help," she said, already starting up the stairs toward me. "Just for tonight, I promise. My cousin kicked me out, and I just need somewhere to crash for a few hours until my friend gets off work." The desperation in her voice was mixed with something else, an edge of aggression that made my pulse quicken. I told her firmly that I couldn't help, that she needed to leave our property, but she kept coming up the stairs, now talking faster, saying she knew I had extra space, that neighbors were supposed to help each other. I managed to get inside and lock the door just as she reached the top of the stairs. She immediately started pounding on it, not knocking but really hammering with her fists. "I know you're in there. Open up. I just need help." The door shook with each impact. I told her through the door that she needed to leave or I'd call the police. That's when she completely lost it. The pounding turned into kicks, and her yelling became screaming. Raw, primal sounds mixed with curses and accusations. She called me every name imaginable, said I was just like everyone else, that I'd regret this. I could hear Mr. Johnson shouting from somewhere below, telling her to get off his property, but she ignored him. I grabbed my phone and called 911, trying to stay calm as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. Through my bedroom window, I could see her now attacking my door with what looked like a garden rake she'd grabbed from somewhere, the metal tines scraping against the wood. The dispatcher said officers were on their way, but those minutes felt like hours. Eventually, I heard sirens approaching and the pounding stopped. I peeked through the blinds and saw Diane running back toward her house, tossing the rake into our yard. 2 police cars pulled up, and I went down to talk to them, still shaking from the adrenaline. The officers took my statement, then went next door to talk to Diane. I could hear her through the walls, playing victim, crying about how she just needed help, and I'd overreacted. But the officers had dealt with her before. I could tell from their tired expressions when they came back. They said they'd warned her about trespassing and told her to stay away from our property. One officer, a younger guy with kind eyes, suggested I get a restraining order if she bothered me again. After they left, I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything. I just sat on my bed, listening to every sound from next door, wondering if she'd come back. Around midnight, I finally heard her house go quiet, but I barely slept, jumping at every creak and rustle outside. The next morning started with an eerie calm. I'd finally dozed off around 4 a.m. and woke up at 7 to birds chirping and sunlight streaming through my blinds. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that maybe last night had been the end of it, that Diane had gotten the message. I made coffee with trembling hands, exhausted but needing to get ready for work. Through my kitchen window, I could see her house look dark and still, no movement behind the torn curtains. I was gathering my work bag when I heard it, screaming from next door, but different from last night. This was pure rage, furniture crashing, glass breaking. Then a man's voice, deep and panicked, yelling, "Stop! Put it down! Diane, stop!" More crashing, then a woman's scream, not Diane's voice, someone younger. I ran to my window and saw a young woman, maybe early 20s, stumbling out of Diane's front door, holding her arm. Blood was seeping through her fingers, staining her white shirt red. She collapsed on the front lawn, and the man, tall, heavy-set, wearing a mechanic's uniform, came running out after her, his face pale with shock. I called 911 again, my voice cracking as I tried to explain what I was seeing. Other neighbors were coming out of their houses now, Peggy from across the street still in her bathrobe, the Nguyens from 2 houses down, everyone gathering but keeping their distance. The man was kneeling beside the woman, pressing his jacket against her arm, talking to her in a low, urgent voice. I could hear him saying, "It's okay, Katie, help's coming, stay with me." Through Diane's open front door, I could see chaos inside, overturned furniture, something that looked like a broken mirror scattered across the floor. Then Diane appeared in the doorway, holding what looked like a kitchen knife, her face contorted with rage. Mascara from last night streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. She was screaming about betrayal, about family who didn't care, about everyone being against her. The man stood up, positioning himself between Diane and the injured woman, his hands raised, pleading with her to put the knife down. But she just stood there in the doorway, waving it around, ranting about money they owed her, about promises they'd broken, about how Katie had stolen from her. The sirens came fast this time. Multiple police cars, an ambulance, even a fire truck. The whole street lit up with red and blue lights reflecting off windows and casting strange shadows everywhere. Officers surrounded Diane's house, weapons drawn, shouting commands for her to drop the knife. She retreated inside, slamming the door, and for a few tense minutes there was a standoff. The paramedics rushed to Katie, loading her onto a gurney while the man, who I learned later was Diane's brother Kevin, gave them information about what happened. He kept saying it was his fault, that he shouldn't have brought Katie there, that he just wanted to check on his sister after hearing about last night's incident from the landlord. The police used a megaphone trying to talk Diane out, but she was screaming from inside, incoherent now, throwing things against the windows. Finally, after what felt like forever but was probably only 20 minutes, she came out. No knife, hands raised but still ranting, spitting at the officers as they cuffed her. Her feet were bare and bleeding, probably from the broken mirror, leaving bloody footprints on the concrete as they led her to the police car. The aftermath was surreal. The entire street was blocked off with yellow tape, detectives going in and out of Diane's house, taking pictures, carrying out evidence bags. I gave my statement to 3 different officers, including details about the night before. Peggy told them about the car incident. The Nguyens mentioned the numerous times they'd called in noise complaints. Everyone had a story about Diane. Kevin sat on the curb for hours, head in his hands, occasionally answering questions from detectives. I heard him tell one officer that Diane had been struggling with meth for years, that the family had tried interventions, rehab, everything, but she always relapsed. Katie was his daughter, Diane's niece, and she just wanted to help her aunt, had even been letting Diane borrow money despite Kevin telling her not to. The knife attack happened when Katie finally said no to giving her $500 for rent that morning. By afternoon, the street was quiet again, but different. We all knew each other now in a way we hadn't before, bonded by this shared trauma. Diane's house stood empty, door sealed with police tape, a reminder of how quickly things could spiral. I moved out 2 weeks later, found a studio apartment downtown that cost twice as much, but felt infinitely safer. Sometimes I still dream about that morning. The blood on the white shirt, the broken glass, the sound of Diane's bare feet on concrete as they took her away. The scraping of metal against frozen dirt at 3 a.m. isn't a sound you forget. That winter of 2015, I was renting this small house on Birch Street in a tiny Michigan town, the kind of place where the local diner still had the same menu from 1987, and everybody pretended they weren't gossiping about their neighbors while buying milk at the corner store. I'd moved there after my divorce, taking night shifts at the hospital as a radiology tech, which meant I kept odd hours and noticed things other people missed. 2 houses down from me lived Mr. Carlson, this guy in his 60s who never trimmed his hedges and whose mailbox was always overflowing with yellowed newspapers. The other neighbors had given up trying to be friendly with him years ago. He'd just stare at you with these pale gray eyes if you tried to make conversation, never saying a word, just waiting until you got uncomfortable enough to walk away. The digging started right after the first hard frost in November, when the ground should have been too solid to work with. I came home from my shift around 7 a.m. and heard this rhythmic chunk, chunk, chunk coming from behind Carlson's overgrown hedges. Through the gaps between the branches, I could see him out there with a pickaxe and shovel, breaking through the frozen topsoil like a man possessed. But these weren't garden beds he was making. Each hole was precisely measured, about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, dug down at least 4 feet deep before he'd start on the next one. Within a week, his entire backyard looked like a checkerboard of excavations, some filled back in with fresh dirt, others left gaping open like wounds in the earth. The strangest part was his schedule. Sometimes I'd hear him at midnight, sometimes at 4 p.m., sometimes during a snowstorm when any sane person would be inside watching TV. I tried talking to some of the other neighbors about it in early December. Mrs. Hoffman, who'd lived on the street for 40 years and knew everyone's family history back 3 generations, just pursed her lips and said Carlson had always been peculiar since his wife disappeared about 8 years back. Not died, disappeared. She'd supposedly run off with some insurance salesman from Toledo, but Mrs. Hoffman said it with this tone that suggested she didn't quite believe that story. The Andersons, the young couple with twin toddlers who lived directly next to Carlson, mentioned they'd called the cops once because the digging was keeping their kids awake, but the officer just said there was no law against landscaping your own property at odd hours. They'd started running a white noise machine in the twins' room and invested in blackout curtains so the motion sensor light Carlson had installed wouldn't wake them every time he went out there with his shovel. By mid-December, things got weirder. I was walking my beagle, Rufus, past Carlson's house one evening around 6 p.m. when I saw him hauling something to one of the holes. These long, heavy bags of what he claimed was fertilizer when he caught me looking. But fertilizer in December? In Michigan? And the bags didn't look right. They were these unmarked black plastic things, maybe 5 feet long, that he'd drag across the frozen grass, leaving deep grooves in the frost. He'd lower them carefully into the holes with this elaborate pulley system he'd rigged up, like they were fragile or important somehow. When he saw me watching, he didn't say anything, just gave me this long, empty stare that made Rufus start whimpering and pulling at his leash to get away. After that, I started taking a different route for our walks, but I could still hear that shovel hitting dirt at all hours, a metallic heartbeat that seemed to pulse through the whole neighborhood. The thing that really made me start documenting everything was when I noticed the pattern. I worked Christmas Eve night, and when I got home Christmas morning, exhausted and ready to sleep through the holiday, I went up to my bedroom, which had a partial view over Carlson's hedge. From that angle, with the winter sun hitting just right and snow covering everything except the disturbed earth, I could finally see the full layout of his backyard. The holes weren't random at all. They formed a perfect grid, 7 rows of 28 rectangular excavations total. Some had been filled in completely and had these small wooden stakes marking them. Others were partially filled, and about 6 were still empty, waiting. But waiting for what? I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures, zooming in as much as I could. That's when I noticed something else. Each filled hole had a date carved into its wooden marker, going back about 3 months. But the dates weren't sequential. They jumped around, November 3rd next to December 15th, next to November 27th. Like he was following some calendar, only he understood. I couldn't stop thinking about those dates over the next few days. I even started keeping a notebook, writing down when I heard him digging, trying to match it with the dates on those markers. Then on December 28th, around 11 p.m., the pattern broke completely. Instead of the steady rhythm of digging I'd gotten used to, there was this frantic quality to it, like he was racing against time. I looked out my window and could see his motion sensor light going crazy, flickering on and off as he moved rapidly between holes. He wasn't digging new ones, he was opening up the filled ones, throwing dirt everywhere with this desperate energy I'd never seen from him before. The next morning, I saw him out there with a garden hose, even though it was about 20 degrees outside, spraying water into each reopened hole while muttering something I couldn't make out. His clothes were filthy, his gray hair wild, and his hands were bleeding from where the frozen dirt had torn through his work gloves. That's when I decided to call the police myself. Not about noise or disturbing the peace, but because something was genuinely wrong here. The dispatcher sounded bored until I mentioned the bloody hands and the 28 holes in a perfect grid. Then she said she'd send someone out to do a welfare check. About an hour later, I watched from my kitchen window as a single patrol car pulled up. The officer, this young guy who looked fresh out of the academy, walked up to Carlson's door and knocked. They talked for maybe 5 minutes on the porch. I could see Carlson gesturing wildly, pointing toward his backyard, and the officer nodding along. Then, to my complete disbelief, the cop just left. I caught him before he drove away and asked what was going on. He said Mr. Carlson explained he was installing an elaborate drainage system for a greenhouse he was planning to build in the spring. Showed him receipts for PVC pipe and everything. The dates on the stakes were supposedly when different sections needed to be completed, according to some farming almanac. The officer looked at me like I was the crazy one for being concerned, but I knew something was wrong when I heard Carlson on the phone that night. My bedroom window was cracked open despite the cold because my radiator was acting up, making the room too hot. Around 2 a.m., I heard his voice carrying across the frozen air from his backyard. Not the words exactly, but the tone. He was pleading with someone, this desperate, broken voice I'd never heard from him before. Then silence for a long time, followed by what sounded like sobbing. The next sound was the shovel again, but slower this time, deliberate. Through my window I could see him working by flashlight now, his motion sensor light turned off, filling in all the holes one by one with this methodical precision. He worked straight through until dawn, and when he was finished, his backyard looked almost normal, just freshly turned earth in neat rectangular patches, like graves in a cemetery that hadn't gotten their headstones yet. For 3 days, nothing happened. No digging, no lights, no movement from Carlson's house at all. His mail started piling up, and his driveway remained unshoveled after a light snowfall on New Year's Eve. I thought maybe he'd finally exhausted himself, or maybe he was sick from being outside in the cold for so long. The Andersons mentioned they hadn't seen him either, and even Mrs. Hoffman seemed concerned, which was unusual for her. She kept peering through her curtains at his house, clutching her phone like she was debating whether to call someone. On January 2nd, I was getting ready for a night shift when I noticed a van parked in Carlson's driveway. Plain white, no company logos, with tinted windows. 2 men in dark coveralls were walking around his backyard with some kind of equipment that looked like metal detectors, sweeping them slowly over each filled hole. They spent about an hour out there, occasionally stopping to plant little orange flags in the ground, marking specific spots in that grid of disturbed earth. The sirens came that evening, right as I was leaving for work. Not just 1 or 2 patrol cars, but the whole circus. Multiple police vehicles, an ambulance, crime scene van, even the coroner's truck. They blocked off the entire street. Yellow tape everywhere, uniforms going in and out of Carlson's house with evidence bags and cameras. I had to show my hospital ID just to get my car out of my own driveway. By the time I got home the next morning, they'd set up these white tents over Carlson's entire backyard, the kind you see on crime shows when they're trying to preserve evidence from the weather. Neighbors were clustered in small groups along the street, whispering and pointing, everyone suddenly having a story about how they'd always known something was off about him. Mrs. Hoffman told me they'd found Carlson in his basement, claimed he'd had a heart attack, but the way she said it, glancing around nervously, I knew she'd heard something else, something worse. The truth came out in pieces over the next few weeks, mostly through a cousin who worked dispatch and the local newspaper that finally got hold of the police report. Carlson hadn't been burying bodies, he'd been digging them up. Turns out his wife never ran off with any insurance salesman. She'd been under the concrete floor of his basement for 8 years, and when the foundation started cracking last fall, he panicked. He'd been moving her remains piece by piece, trying to spread them across those 28 holes, thinking if he distributed everything far enough apart, no one would ever be able to prove anything if the basement was ever excavated. The phone call I'd heard that night was to his brother in Colorado, confessing everything, saying the guilt was eating him alive. The brother had called the FBI, and those men with the metal detectors were federal agents using ground-penetrating radar to map out exactly where he'd put everything. The medical examiner said Carlson had ingested enough sleeping pills to kill 3 people, washing them down with antifreeze he'd bought at the auto parts store, probably right after filling in those holes for the last time. They spent 2 weeks excavating that backyard, sifting through every cubic inch of dirt in those 28 holes. I had to stay at a motel because they needed access to my property line, and the smell. God, the smell once they started finding things. Not just remains, but jewelry, pieces of clothing. Even her wedding ring still on a finger bone they found in hole number 17. The Anderson family moved out before the investigation was even finished. Said they couldn't stand knowing what had been happening just over their fence while their babies played in the yard. Mrs. Hoffman had a stroke a month later, though the doctors said it wasn't related. The house stood empty for 3 years before they finally tore it down, and even now, that lot remains vacant. Sometimes when I drive past it on my way to visit my daughter in Detroit, I can still see the outline of those holes in the grass, 28 perfect rectangles that refuse to blend in no matter how many times they reseed the lawn, like the earth itself remembers what was hidden there and won't let anyone forget. "7 months ago, I moved into what seemed like the perfect rental house in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Phoenix. I was 32, had just landed a promotion at the accounting firm where I worked, and finally had enough saved to live somewhere with an actual yard instead of another cramped apartment. The house was nothing fancy, a modest 2-bedroom with faded yellow siding and a single-car garage, but it represented everything I'd been working toward. My first week there, I remember thinking how lucky I was to find such a peaceful street, lined with mesquite trees and houses that looked like they'd been there since the 80s. Most of my neighbors were older couples who kept to themselves, exactly what I wanted after years of thin apartment walls. The only exception was the house directly next to mine, where a guy named Travis lived with what seemed like a rotating cast of roommates. Travis was probably in his late 20s, drove a beat-up Ford F-150 with those aftermarket LED headlights that could blind you from a mile away, and had this habit of hosting parties every Thursday through Saturday night. At first, I tried to be understanding. We'd all been young once, right? But these weren't just regular get-togethers. The bass from his sound system would rattle my windows until 3 or 4 in the morning, and his backyard would fill with dozens of people shouting over the music, their voices carrying straight into my bedroom. I'd bought a white noise machine, then upgraded to heavy-duty earplugs, even rearranged my whole bedroom so my bed was as far from his property as possible. Nothing worked. After 6 weeks of barely sleeping 3 nights a week, stumbling through client meetings with bags under my eyes, I finally did what I'd been avoiding. I called in a noise complaint to the non-emergency police line. The Monday after I made that call, everything changed. I was getting ready for work around 7 a.m. when I noticed Travis's truck idling at the end of his driveway, exhaust fumes drifting in the cool morning air. Strange thing was, he was just sitting there, not looking at his phone or anything, just staring straight ahead through his windshield. I didn't think much of it until I backed out of my garage and started down the street. In my rearview mirror, I watched his truck pull out and fall in behind me, keeping about 3 car lengths back. We both turned left onto Cedar Road, then right onto the main boulevard. By the time I merged onto the I-10, he was still there, maintaining that same exact distance. My office was a good 25 minutes away, and Travis followed me for 20 of those minutes before suddenly taking an exit about 5 miles from my workplace. The next morning, same thing. His truck waiting, him following, keeping that precise distance like he'd measured it out. Wednesday morning, I decided to test it. Instead of my usual route, I took a completely unnecessary detour through a residential area, making random turns through streets I'd never driven before. There he was, that faded red F-150 with the dented rear bumper, turning when I turned, stopping when I stopped at signs. At one point, I pulled into a gas station I didn't need, just to see what he'd do. He drove past, but when I came back out and continued toward work, there he was again, waiting at the next intersection like he knew exactly where I'd be. That's when I found the first note. I came home that evening to find a piece of paper tucked under my front door. Not mailed, not in an envelope, just a folded sheet of computer paper. The message was typed in all caps. Mind your own business next time. Neighbors should stick together, not call cops on each other. You made your choice. The notes kept coming, each one more unhinged than the last. Thursday's was shoved through the mail slot while I was eating dinner. I actually heard it slide through and hit the floor. This one had a photo printed on regular paper, grainy and dark, but I could make out my own car in my driveway, taken from what must have been Travis's property line. Below the photo, sleep tight knowing you ruined a good thing. Cops won't always be around. Friday's note appeared on my windshield when I came out for work, held down by the wiper blade. Just one line this time. I know your schedule better than you do. I started parking in the garage after that, keeping the door locked even during the day, checking my mirrors constantly during my commute. I'd catch glimpses of his truck at different times, sometimes behind me, sometimes parked across from my office building, sometimes just driving past my house slowly at odd hours. I installed a Ring doorbell, started documenting everything, taking photos of the notes, screenshots of the camera footage showing his truck creeping by at 2 a.m., 3:47 a.m., 5:15 a.m. I went to the police station that Saturday with everything I'd collected. The officer who took my report, a tired-looking woman named Officer Brennan, listened to my story while clicking through the photos on my phone. She told me what I'd already figured out. The notes were concerning, but not explicitly threatening enough for immediate action. The following could be coincidental since we lived on the same street. And without proof Travis was the one leaving the notes, their hands were tied. She said they'd increase patrols in the area and suggested I file for a restraining order on Monday. The forms she gave me felt pathetically thin in my hands. That night, Travis threw another party, the music louder than ever, like he knew about my visit to the station. I lay in bed with my phone in my hand, wondering if I should call in another complaint, but something told me that would only make things worse. Around 1 a.m., during a brief lull in the music, I heard footsteps on my front porch, slow and deliberate, followed by what sounded like someone trying my doorknob. Sunday was quiet. Too quiet. No truck following me to the grocery store. No notes, no late-night drive-bys. Travis's house looked empty. His truck gone all day. I almost let myself relax. Spent the afternoon doing laundry and meal prepping for the week, trying to pretend everything was normal. But that evening, while I was taking out the trash, I saw something that made my whole body go rigid. There was a spare key to my house that I kept hidden under a fake rock near the back gate, the kind you buy at Home Depot that's supposed to blend in with real rocks. The fake rock was sitting on top of my garbage can lid, placed there deliberately, and when I picked it up with trembling fingers, the compartment was empty. The key was gone. I ran back inside, slammed the door behind me, and called a locksmith for an emergency rekey, not caring that Sunday rates would cost me $300. While I waited for them to arrive, I wedged a chair under the front doorknob and pushed my couch against the back door. The locksmith finished around 9 p.m. and I felt marginally safer with new keys in my pocket. I even managed to fall asleep around midnight, exhausted from the stress of the past week. Then at 2:47 a.m., I remember the exact time because I stared at my phone screen in disbelief. I woke up to the sound of my garage door opening, not breaking, not being forced, opening smoothly with the automatic opener, like someone had the remote. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd started keeping beside my bed and crept toward the door that led from my kitchen to the garage. Through the window, I could see the garage door was fully up, the space empty except for my car, the street beyond dark and silent. Then headlights flooded the space as Travis's truck pulled straight into my garage, parking beside my car like he belonged there. He got out slowly, casually, wearing dark jeans and a black hoodie despite the warm night. He wasn't rushing, wasn't trying to hide. He stood there in my garage looking directly at the window where I was watching and gave a small wave with his fingers. I called 911 while backing away from the window, whispering frantically to the dispatcher that someone had broken into my garage and was just standing there. Travis must have heard me on the phone because he started walking toward the door that connected the garage to my kitchen, the same door I was standing behind. He didn't try the handle, didn't knock, just stood on the other side, maybe 2 feet away from me with only that hollow door between us. Then he started talking, his voice calm and conversational, loud enough to carry through. "You know, I grew up in this house. My parents owned it for 30 years before they sold it. I helped my dad install that garage door opener when I was 16. Still remember the code, 1988, his birth year. Funny how new owners never think to change those things." He paused and I could hear him shifting his weight, the concrete creaking under his boots. "The parties were never about the music, man. It was about respect. This whole street, we look out for each other. But you went straight to the cops. Didn't even try to talk to me first." The dispatcher kept asking me questions, but I could barely focus, just kept repeating the address and begging them to hurry. Travis continued, his tone getting harder. "I've been really patient with you. Following you to work? That was just me showing you I could. The notes? Just trying to communicate since you clearly don't like face-to-face conversation. But breaking into my old house to stand in my old garage? That's me being nice. Because what I really want to do is open this door and explain things properly. I heard him try the handle then, locked, thankfully, and he let out this disappointed sigh. You changed the locks today, smart. But you didn't change the garage code, did you? And you know what else you didn't think about? Your car is right here next to mine. Would be a real shame if something happened to it while we wait for your cop friends. I heard something metal scraping against metal, keys against my car door maybe. And that's when I saw the patrol car lights through my front window, red and blue washing across my living room walls. Travis heard the sirens too. Through the door, I heard him chuckle, this low sound that made my stomach twist into knots. Guess that's my cue, he said, like we'd been having a normal conversation. But hey, we're neighbors, right? I'm not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. We'll have plenty of time to sort this out. I heard his footsteps moving away from the door, unhurried, and then the sound of his truck door opening. The police pulled up just as he was backing out of my garage, and I watched through my front window as they stopped him in the driveway. 2 officers got out, flashlights in hand, and Travis rolled down his window, gesturing casually as he talked. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but after about 10 minutes they let him walk back to his house. Just like that. One of the officers, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy, came to my door and explained that Travis claimed I'd given him permission to park in my garage because his driveway was full from the party guests earlier. Since there was no sign of forced entry and Travis had left willingly when asked, they couldn't arrest him. The officer took my statement, documented the scratches on my car door, deep grooves that spelled out "mind your own" before apparently being interrupted, and said a detective would follow up in the morning. After they left, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with every light on, baseball bat across my lap, watching through the windows. Around 5 a.m., I saw Travis's front door open. He walked to the edge of his property, coffee mug in hand, and just stood there looking at my house. We made eye contact through my living room window, and he raised his mug like he was toasting me. That was 3 days ago. I've been staying at a motel since then, only coming back during the day when there are witnesses around. The detective says they're building a case, that the scratches on my car are enough for vandalism charges at least. Travis's parties have stopped, but every time I drive by to check my mail or grab more clothes, his truck is in the driveway, and he's always somewhere visible, washing his car, sitting on his porch, trimming his hedges, always watching, always waiting. The lease on my house has 8 more months, and breaking it would cost me thousands I don't have. So for now, we're at this horrible stalemate, 2 neighbors locked in a silent war that I never wanted, all because I just wanted to sleep through the night. The rental house on Ashwood Drive came with warnings we chose to ignore, because the price was too good to pass up. 5 college students splitting $800 a month meant we could actually afford groceries and textbooks that semester, which mattered more to us than Frank the landlord's nervous comments about colorful neighbors, while he jingled his keys and avoided eye contact. Nathan and I took the upstairs bedroom with the cracked window that overlooked both yards, while Jessica and her cousin Megan grabbed the 2 downstairs rooms, and Colby set up in what used to be a dining room. We were all around 21, that age where you think you can handle anything because you've survived a few years away from home and figured out how to do your own taxes. The house itself was nothing special: faded yellow siding, a fence held together by rust and wishful thinking, and kitchen cabinets that didn't quite close all the way. But it was ours for the year, and we spent that first afternoon hauling in secondhand furniture and making plans for dinner parties, study groups, all the things you imagine when you're young and signing your first real lease. The duplex next door looked like our house's evil twin, same structure, but where we had Jessica's attempt at a flower garden and string lights Nathan hung crooked across the porch, they had broken glass ground into the dirt and aluminum foil covering every window. 4 men lived there, each one carrying that hollow-cheeked, jumpy energy of long-term meth users, their ages hard to pin down but probably between 35 and 50. The chemical smell hit you before you even saw them. this acidic burn that made your nose itch and your eyes water if the wind blew wrong. Their fights were legendary among the other student rentals on our block. Volcanic screaming matches at 3 a.m. that ended with someone getting thrown into the fence or car windows, getting smashed with crowbars. But the tall one with the shaved head was different from the others. While they'd scream and throw punches at each other, he'd stand perfectly still on their porch, smoking cigarette after cigarette, these prison tattoos crawling up his neck like black veins. His eyes were this washed-out gray, like dirty ice, and whenever I walked from my car to the front door, he'd track my movement without turning his head, just his eyes following me until I disappeared inside. Everything changed on a Thursday night in early September, when their usual screaming match turned into something else entirely. Nathan and I were upstairs studying for midterms. Jessica was at her restaurant job, and Megan and Colby were watching something on Netflix when we heard the crash. Not the usual bottle throwing or door slamming, but the sound of a human body hitting our fence hard enough to crack the posts. Through our bedroom window, I saw two of them beating the third one with what looked like pieces of rebar, real methodical hits to his ribs and legs while he curled up in the dirt trying to protect his head. The tall one with the gray eyes just stood there watching, lighting another cigarette with steady hands while his roommate got destroyed 10 feet away. Nathan was already on the phone with 911, but I couldn't look away from the tall one's face. He was smiling this small, satisfied smile, like he was watching his favorite TV show. When the cops finally showed up 15 minutes later, the beaten guy was unconscious, blood pooling under his face, and they had to call an ambulance. The other three stood there lying through their teeth, claiming he fell down the stairs, and somehow the cops bought it or just didn't care enough to push it. After that night, the tall one started paying attention to me in a way that made my skin prickle with warning. He learned my schedule somehow. He'd be sitting on their porch when I left for my morning classes at 8:30, still there when I got back around 2. Always in the same plastic chair with its broken armrest, always smoking and staring. He started showing up at the grocery store where I shopped, never with a cart or basket, just wandering the aisles until he found me, then staying exactly 2 aisles over, close enough that I could feel him watching through the gaps in the shelves. Once I tested it, doubling back through the cereal aisle 3 times, and each time he adjusted his position to keep me in sight. The campus coffee shop where I studied Tuesday afternoons. Suddenly he was there too, sitting in the corner with nothing but a water cup, those gray eyes locked on me over my laptop screen. Nathan wanted to confront him, but I begged him not to, remembering that smile while his friend bled into the dirt, knowing that provoking someone like that would only make things worse. The stalking escalated the following week when I found him standing directly outside our front door at 11 p.m., just standing there in the dark, not knocking or trying the handle, just breathing loud enough that I could hear it through the wood. I'd gone downstairs to get water and saw his shadow through the frosted glass panel, this tall dark shape that wasn't moving at all. My phone was upstairs, Nathan was asleep, and I stood there in our hallway for 20 minutes, barefoot on the cold hardwood, watching that shadow and praying he'd leave. When Jessica's key finally rattled in the lock from the other side, he stepped back into the darkness so fast she didn't even see him, just walked in complaining about her shift while I stood there shaking, trying to explain what had just happened. The next morning we found cigarette butts arranged in a perfect circle on our doormat, all the same brand he smoked, each one crushed in the exact same way. Nathan called the cops, but they said standing on a porch wasn't illegal, and without proof of threats or trespassing, there was nothing they could do. The officer, this tired-looking woman who'd probably dealt with our neighbors before, just shrugged and suggested we get better locks and maybe some cameras if we were really worried. That Friday, things got worse when Nathan and I came home from a late movie to find the tall one sitting on our porch steps, not his own. He was carving something into the wooden railing with a pocket knife, these deep gouges that turned out to be my initials when we looked closer later. Nathan lost it, told him to get the hell off our property, his voice cracking between anger and fear, while I stood behind him gripping his arm hard enough to leave marks. The tall one stood up real slow, unfolding himself like some kind of insect, until he towered over both of us. He must have been 6'4" at least, with arms covered in those homemade tattoos that looked like infection waiting to happen. He leaned in close enough that I could smell him. Cigarettes, something chemical, and this underlying stench like meat starting to turn, and said my name, just my first name, in this whisper that sounded like he'd been practicing it. Then he walked back to his place without another word, but stopped at the property line to look back and blow me a kiss. Nathan called 911 again, and this time they sent 2 officers who took a report and pictures of the carved initials, but said since he left when asked it was just misdemeanor vandalism at worst. We started taking precautions after that. Nathan walked me to and from my car every single time. We installed a doorbell camera with our pooled tip money from Jessica's restaurant job, and Colby started sleeping on the couch downstairs with that baseball bat within reach. For 3 days, we didn't see the tall one at all, and I started to think maybe the police visit had scared him off. But on Monday night around 2 a.m., I woke up to Nathan squeezing my shoulder, his whole body rigid beside me in bed. Through our cracked window came voices from below, not yelling this time, but low conversation, and the unmistakable sound of our back gate's latch being worked. The gate had a padlock, but we could hear metal scraping against metal, testing, prying. Nathan already had his phone out calling 911 while I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. There were 3 figures in our backyard, the tall one and 2 of his roommates, all of them moving with that twitchy meth energy, but trying to be quiet about it. One had bolt cutters. Another was carrying something wrapped in a towel that had the weight and shape of a crowbar or worse. They got through the padlock in less than a minute, and then they were in our backyard proper, moving toward the house with purpose. The tall one went straight for the spot under our bedroom window, looking up like he knew exactly which room was mine, while the other 2 spread out to check the back door and the windows of the ground floor bedrooms where Jessica and Megan were sleeping. I could hear my heartbeat in my throat as the tall one reached up and actually touched our window screen, running his fingers along the mesh like he was testing how hard it would be to cut through. Nathan was whispering frantically to the 911 operator, giving our address saying they were actively trying to break in. Please hurry. Please send someone now. Through the phone, I could hear the dispatcher saying units were on the way, stay inside, stay on the line. But those minutes stretched out like hours. The one at the back door had started working on the lock with something metal, the scratching sound carrying up through the walls, while the tall one pulled out what looked like a box cutter and started sawing at our screen, these deliberate strokes that sent the mesh curling inward toward us. Just when the screen gave way with this sick tearing sound and his hand started reaching through, sirens exploded into the distance, not close yet, but close enough. The change in the 3 men was instant, like roaches when you flip on a light. The tall one yanked his arm back so fast he left skin on the torn mesh, and all 3 of them bolted toward the back gate. But in their panic, one of them, the shorter guy with the face tattoos, tripped over Jessica's garden hose and went down hard, the towel-wrapped object flying from his hands and landing with a heavy thud in the grass. They didn't stop for him or the weapon, just kept running, vanishing through the gate into the alley behind our house. The sirens got louder, closer, and then there were red and blue lights flooding our backyard, cops with flashlights drawn running the same path the intruders had taken. Nathan and I stayed locked in our room, holding each other and shaking, while we heard the police radio chatter outside. 3 subjects fleeing westbound, requesting backup, need canine unit for track. Within 10 minutes, they'd caught all 3 of them trying to hide in a shed 2 blocks over. The cops brought them back in separate cars, and through our window, I watched the tall one in the backseat of a cruiser, his gray eyes finding mine even from that distance, even with his hands cuffed behind him. The police searched them and their duplex with a warrant that night, finding 2 knives, brass knuckles, and enough meth to put them away for serious time. The item dropped in our yard turned out to be a sawed-off piece of pipe, filed down at one end to a sharp edge. The detective who interviewed us the next morning, an older guy with kind eyes who kept calling me Han, said they'd found notebooks in the tall one's room. Pages and pages about me. My schedule, my license plate, descriptions of my clothes, detailed plans about what he wanted to do once he got me alone. Some of the pages had drawings that the detective wouldn't let me see, just said they were evidence of intent, and that we were lucky we'd called when we did. The tall one got 15 years. The meth possession, attempted breaking and entering, stalking charges, and apparently he was already on parole for something the detective wouldn't specify but implied was violent. His two buddies got 5 to 7 each. We had to testify at the preliminary hearing, and even from across the courtroom with guards between us, he never stopped staring at me, mouthing words I couldn't make out but knew weren't apologies. The prosecutor, this sharp woman in her 40s who didn't mess around, said his notebooks alone were enough to establish premeditation for whatever he'd been planning that night. She showed the jury photos of our carved-up window screen, the circle of cigarettes, my initials gouged into our porch, and apparently that was just the stuff they could show in court. We moved out 2 weeks after the trial, breaking our lease early, and Frank didn't even fight us on keeping the deposit. Turned out we weren't the first tenants to have problems with that duplex next door, just the first ones to survive long enough to press charges. Jessica found us a new place closer to campus, more expensive, but in a neighborhood full of families and retired professors who complained if your music was too loud after 9 p.m., which sounded like paradise after Ashwood Drive. 6 months later, I ran into the detective at a coffee shop downtown, and he recognized me immediately, asked how I was doing with this genuine concern that made me tear up right there by the espresso machine. He told me something that still makes my whole body go cold when I think about it. They'd found more notebooks hidden in the tall one's ceiling, older ones, with notes about other girls. 3 different women over 2 years, all college students, all living within a few blocks of that duplex. 2 had moved away suddenly, breaking leases just like we did, and 1 had been reported missing 6 months before we moved in, though they could never prove anything. The detective said the tall one wasn't talking, would probably never admit to anything, but the way he said it made me understand what he really meant. We got out just in time. Nathan and I are still together, living in a different state now, both graduated and working normal jobs, but I still check locks obsessively, still look for gray eyes in crowds, still wake up sometimes thinking I hear someone sawing through window screens. The detective gave me his card that day in the coffee shop, said to call if I ever needed anything, and I still carry it in my wallet like a talisman, proof that it really happened, that we really survived it, that those 3 a.m. sirens really did save my life. "4 inches doesn't sound like much until someone tries to steal them from your backyard. I was out there that morning in August 2016, watering my tomato plants, when I noticed Douglas Brenner standing at the edge of my property with a contractor and a pile of fence posts. They were setting markers and something was wrong. The line they were marking cut into my yard, past where the old chain-link fence had stood for 40 years. Oliver, my rescue beagle, was barking at them through the window, sensing trouble before I fully understood what was happening. I walked over, still holding the garden hose, water dripping onto my bare feet. Douglas didn't even acknowledge me at first, just kept pointing at spots for the contractor to mark, consulting this little notebook he always carried. When I asked what they were doing, he said, without looking up, that he was fixing a 40-year-old mistake, and that the property line had been wrong since before I was born. Those 4 inches of grass I'd been mowing for 2 years? According to him, they'd always been his. I should explain who Douglas was because nothing about this man was normal. Mid-50s, worked some kind of night security job that had him leaving at 10 p.m. sharp every night. He'd moved in about 6 months after I'd inherited my grandmother's house, and from the start, he was peculiar. Impossibly tall at 6'3", he had this way of walking where he'd lean forward like he was pushing through an invisible barrier. His hair was dyed this aggressive auburn color that looked like rust in the sunlight, always slicked back with enough gel to style 3 people. But the strangest thing was his measuring obsession. I'd catch him at all hours with a tape measure, checking distances between his driveway and the curb, from his mailbox to his front door, always writing numbers in that notebook. Once I saw him at dawn, literally measuring the height of his grass before mowing it. The man treated his property like it was a crime scene that needed constant documentation, and now he wanted 4 inches of mine. The argument started civil enough. I told him we needed to check the property records at City Hall before anyone built anything. He pulled out a folded survey map from his back pocket. Of course he had one ready, covered in pencil marks and calculations. His finger, which I noticed had a perfectly manicured nail, traced along a line that did indeed show the property boundary, cutting into what I'd always considered my yard. But here's the thing. My grandmother had lived in that house since 1976, and that chain-link fence had been there when she moved in. 40 years of established boundary had to count for something, right? I mentioned adverse possession, something I'd Googled on my phone while he was talking, and his face changed. Not dramatically, but his jaw tightened and this vein appeared on his temple, pulsing like a little worm under his skin. He folded the map very slowly, creasing each fold with his thumbnail, and said I had 24 hours to reconsider my position before he proceeded with the fence installation. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. I kept replaying how his voice had dropped when he said reconsider, how he'd smiled but only with his mouth while his eyes stayed flat and unblinking. Oliver was restless too, kept growling at the window that faced Douglas's house. Around midnight, I heard something outside and peeked through the blinds. Douglas was out there with a flashlight and his tape measure, walking the disputed line over and over, occasionally stopping to write in his notebook. He did this for 2 hours straight, just pacing and measuring. And at one point he stood at my bedroom window for a full minute, flashlight pointed down but clearly aware which room was mine. I called my friend Amy, asked if I was being paranoid. She said to document everything, maybe install a camera. I wish I'd listened to her sooner. The next morning, Wednesday, I went to City Hall right when they opened. The clerk who helped me, a woman named Dolores with cat-eye glasses and fingernails painted different colors, pulled up the property records on her ancient computer. The original plot maps from 1951 were unclear about the exact boundary. The measurements were in some old surveying system that nobody used anymore. But here's what Dolores found interesting. In 1976, when my grandmother bought the house, there was a surveyor's note mentioning the existing fence as the established boundary marker. She printed everything out for me, highlighting the relevant parts with a yellow marker that smelled like artificial lemons. I felt vindicated, had this whole speech planned for Douglas about respecting long-time boundaries and being a good neighbor. When I got home, his contractor was already there, post-hole digger running, and they'd started installing the fence exactly where Douglas wanted it. The 4 inches of my yard now had posts cemented into it. I marched over there with my papers, Oliver trailing behind me on his leash because I didn't trust him not to bite someone in my current mood. Douglas was standing by his garage, watching the work with his arms crossed. When I showed him the documents, he didn't even look at them. Just stared at me with this expression I can only describe as amused contempt, like I was a child showing him a crayon drawing. He said possession was 9/10 of the law, and unless I had $10,000 for a proper survey and legal fees, I should accept reality. Then he said something that made my scalp prickle. Your grandmother was smarter than you. She knew when to leave things alone. The way he said it, the implication that he'd had this same dispute with her, made me realize this wasn't really about 4 inches of grass. Oliver started barking frantically, pulling at his leash, and Douglas just watched us with that same flat stare until I retreated back to my house. Thursday morning, I woke up to a flat tire, not just low on air, completely shredded, like someone had taken a knife to it multiple times. The sidewall was ribboned, rubber hanging in strips. I knew it was him, but of course I couldn't prove anything. The security camera I'd ordered wouldn't arrive until Monday. I called in sick to work, got the tire replaced at a shop downtown. The mechanic, a kid maybe 20 years old with gauge earrings and grease under his fingernails, asked if I'd pissed someone off because this was deliberate damage, no question. Cost me $200 I didn't really have. When I got home, the fence was completely installed, and Douglas had already hung a no trespassing sign on his side, facing my yard. But that wasn't the worst part. Oliver was in my front yard, running loose, my back gate wide open. He never left the backyard on his own. Someone had deliberately let him out. I found him sniffing around Mrs. Garrison's petunias, thankfully unharmed, but the message was clear. Friday was quiet, almost worse than if something had happened. I worked my full shift, came home to find everything seemingly normal. Douglas's car was gone, his night shift. I stood at my kitchen window looking at that new fence, at those stolen 4 inches of yard, and felt this rage building in my chest. Around 8 p.m., I grabbed a measuring tape from my grandmother's old toolbox and went outside. I wanted to document exactly how far into my property he'd built. As I was crouched down, measuring from the old fence line mark still visible in the grass, I heard breathing behind me. Heavy, deliberate breathing. Douglas was standing 3 feet away, dressed in his security uniform. Black pants, black shirt with some company logo I couldn't make out in the dim light. He must have doubled back after leaving. "Measuring won't change anything," he said, his voice so calm it raised goosebumps on my arms. "But if it makes you feel better, go ahead. I'll wait." And he did. Stood there for 20 minutes while I pretended to take measurements, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the tape steady. Saturday morning brought a new development. I woke up around 7 to Oliver going absolutely insane, barking and scratching at the back door. Through the kitchen window, I saw Douglas in my backyard, not his newly claimed strip, but deep in my actual yard, near my tomato plants. He was on his knees with that notebook, sketching something, occasionally standing up to take photos with a digital camera that looked like it belonged in a museum. When I yanked open the door to confront him, he calmly stood up and walked toward me, not hurrying, not acknowledging he'd done anything wrong. "Your eastern boundary is also incorrect," he announced, like he was telling me the weather. "The previous owners of my house let your grandmother encroach there too. 3 feet, possibly 3.5. He held up his notebook, showing me incomprehensible diagrams and numbers. "I'm being generous, only taking back the 4 inches on the north side, for now." The way he said, "for now," made my knees weak. This wasn't going to end with the fence. The real escalation happened Saturday night. I'd called the police earlier about the trespassing, but they said without proof of damage or threat, it was a civil matter. The officer who came by, a tired-looking woman named Officer Reeves, basically told me to get a lawyer. Around 11 p.m., I was getting ready for bed when Oliver started growling at the front door. Through the peephole, I saw Douglas standing on my porch. Not knocking, not moving, just standing there facing my door with his hands clasped behind his back. I didn't open it, obviously. Called 911, but by the time they arrived 15 minutes later, he was gone. Officer Reeves came back, looked annoyed, suggested maybe I was overreacting to a neighbor dispute. But then we found what he'd left. A manila envelope tucked into my screen door. Inside were dozens of photos of my house, some dating back years. My grandmother working in the garden, her at the mailbox, even some through windows showing her watching TV. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note. She understood the importance of boundaries. You need to learn. Sunday was when I decided to fight back, but not how you'd think. I spent the morning at my grandmother's old desk, going through her papers, looking for anything about Douglas. Found it in a notebook from 2014, her shaky handwriting describing the strange man next door who watches through the fence. She documented dates and times, just like he did with his measurements. One entry made me nauseous. He comes into the yard when I'm at church. Leaves things moved just enough so I know he was here. Police won't help. Installed better locks today. My grandmother had been dealing with this for 2 years before she died, and never told anyone. I called Amy, asked her to come over, didn't want to be alone anymore. She arrived around 2 p.m. with her husband Carl, a contractor who took one look at the fence situation, and said Douglas had actually done a sloppy job. The posts weren't properly set. The whole thing could be legally challenged as unsafe construction. We were discussing options when Douglas appeared at the new fence, just materialized there like he'd been waiting. "You have visitors," he said to me, ignoring Amy and Carl completely. "That's nice, but they'll leave eventually. Everyone does. And then it's just you and me again, discussing what's mine." That evening, after Amy and Carl left despite my begging them to stay, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this, walking on eggshells, waiting for the next escalation. I found a locksmith who did emergency calls, had him come out and change every lock on the house, install deadbolts, secure the windows. Cost me $800 on credit cards I'd been trying to pay down. While the locksmith worked, I saw Douglas watching from his kitchen window, that notebook in his hand, writing constantly. Around 9 p.m., just as the locksmith was leaving, Douglas knocked on my door. Not the aggressive standing from before, but a polite, normal knock. Against every instinct, I answered it, keeping the chain on. He was holding a pie. An actual pie, like something from a sitcom, steam still rising from the crust. "Apple," he said, his face arranged in what he probably thought was a friendly expression. "To apologize for any misunderstanding. Your grandmother loved my pies. She gave me her key once so I could leave them inside when she wasn't home. I still have it actually, the key, but I suppose it won't work anymore, will it?" He smiled then, all teeth, and I slammed the door so hard the walls shook. Monday morning, I woke up to find Oliver in my bedroom, which was weird because I'd left him downstairs. The back door was still locked, deadbolt in place, but the door frame was slightly splintered, like someone had tried to force it but stopped. On my kitchen table was a survey map, not a copy, but an original from 1951, with new red lines drawn all over it. Every red line cut into my property, not just the 4 inches, but claiming nearly 6 feet on the east side, 3 feet on the south. A yellow sticky note was attached. "Original boundaries, happy to discuss timeline for corrections. DB." My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my coffee mug, ceramic exploding across the floor. Oliver wouldn't stop whimpering, pawing at the front door to get out. That's when I saw it through the window. Douglas had installed surveyor's stakes throughout my yard during the night, orange flags marking his imaginary new territory. But the moment that broke me was finding my grandmother's garden completely destroyed, every tomato plant ripped from the ground and laid in a perfect line along what he claimed was the real boundary. I called the police again, and this time got a different officer, a younger guy named Daniels who actually took me seriously. He looked at the splintered door frame, the photos Douglas had left earlier, my grandmother's journal entries. Turned out Douglas Brenner had a history. Not violence exactly, but property disputes at 3 previous addresses, always with single women, always escalating until they moved. Officer Daniels helped me file for an emergency restraining order, walked me through the process, even gave me his direct number. The court date was set for Thursday. I spent Monday through Wednesday at Amy's house with Oliver, only going home with Carl to grab clothes and essentials. But Douglas must have been watching, because each time we went there was something new. More stakes, new red lines spray painted on my driveway, and once, all my mail spread across the porch in a perfect grid pattern, each piece exactly 2 inches apart. Thursday's court hearing was surreal. Douglas showed up in a suit that looked like it hadn't been worn in years, too tight in the shoulders, pants an inch too short. He'd brought a briefcase full of his documentation, hundreds of pages of measurements, photos, maps, all in clear plastic sleeves with typed labels. When he spoke to the judge, his voice was different, higher-pitched, almost childlike, explaining how he was just trying to restore proper order to the neighborhood. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Harrison, looked through his papers for maybe 30 seconds before granting the restraining order. Douglas couldn't come within 100 feet of me or my property, had to remove all his stakes and markers, and the fence issue would be handled in civil court. When the judge read the decision, Douglas's face didn't change, but his left eye started twitching, this rapid flutter that made him look like he was winking repeatedly. He packed up his briefcase methodically, each paper returned to its exact place, then stood up and stared at me for a full 10 seconds before Officer Daniels told him to move along. The next 3 days were peaceful. Douglas's stakes disappeared. The fence remained, but I'd deal with that legally, and I actually slept through the night. Sunday evening, I was back home feeling almost normal when Oliver started barking at the back door again. Douglas wasn't there. He couldn't be, not without violating the order. But lined up along the fence on his side were dozens of garden gnomes, all facing my house. Each one had a tiny notebook glued to its hands and miniature measuring tapes attached to their belts. In the center was a larger gnome with auburn hair painted on, obviously meant to be him. I called Officer Daniels, who came by and took photos, but said technically it wasn't a violation. The gnomes were on his property. That night I made my decision. Monday morning I called a realtor. The house sold in 3 weeks under market value, but I didn't care. The new owners were a young family with 3 kids, the kind of chaos Douglas wouldn't be able to intimidate. Before I left, I drove by one last time and saw him in his yard, measuring the distance between each gnome with his tape measure, adjusting them by millimeters. The new owners lasted 6 months before they had him arrested for trespassing. He's in jail now, Amy told me. Not for the harassment, but for violating his probation from a previous stalking charge in another state. I still have dreams about those 4 inches of grass, about finding him standing in my kitchen with his notebook, measuring the distance between my fear and his obsession. My name's Daniel, and at the time all this went down, I'd been living in a quiet cul-de-sac for about 3 years. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it had the kind of routine comfort that makes you forget the world outside can be chaotic. I worked from home most days, spent weekends grilling with a couple of neighbors, and usually ended my evenings on the porch with a cold beer. That sense of calm started to erode the moment one particular homeowner, a guy named Richard, decided to make himself the self-appointed enforcer of our block. From the start, he rubbed everyone the wrong way, but none of us could have guessed just how bad things would get. Richard had this big red pickup he treated like it was an extension of his personality, always parked sideways across someone's driveway or blocking part of the street. If you asked him to move it, he'd respond with a smirk or some nonsense about neighborhood codes that he seemed to invent on the spot. He once told me my trash cans were facing the wrong direction and claimed he'd report me for it. At first, I laughed it off. We all did. But the small harassments added up. Bogus complaints about lawns, fake rules about hedges, even telling kids where they could and couldn't ride their bikes. It felt less like eccentric behavior and more like he enjoyed pushing boundaries just to remind us he could. The first time I noticed something was seriously wrong was when his wife, Ellen, started showing up outside more often. She was polite, never said much, and had this way of avoiding eye contact whenever Richard was nearby. One afternoon while walking my dog, I saw her tugging on a sleeve to hide dark marks along her arm. Later, I spotted faint bruises around her jawline. When a neighbor gently asked if she was all right, Ellen forced a quick, "I'm fine," and slipped back inside. The unspoken agreement among us was clear. We were worried for her, but confronting Richard felt like walking into a storm. Things escalated on a humid evening when Richard stormed out of his house because the kids next door were playing tag in their yard. He started yelling about disrespect and noise violations while pointing at one of the boys, maybe 10 years old. What froze everyone in place was when he went back to his truck and pulled out a handgun, waving it around as if to punctuate his threats. Parents screamed, kids scattered, and the entire block went silent except for his ranting. That was the moment we all knew this wasn't just a difficult neighbor situation anymore. It was a powder keg waiting to blow. That night shook everyone. A couple of us tried calling the police, but when officers finally showed up, Richard was calm again, leaning against his truck like nothing happened. He spun some story about feeling threatened by aggressive kids, and since no one was physically harmed, they left with nothing more than a warning. The disbelief on the parents' faces said it all. How could waving a gun at children not count as immediate danger? From then on, every neighbor knew we couldn't rely on quick intervention. It was like Richard had found the perfect loophole in the system. The strange part was how Richard seemed to feed off the fear. The day after the incident, he walked down the street whistling, slow and deliberate, like he was reminding everyone he wasn't going anywhere. Ellen trailed behind him, clutching a grocery bag so tightly her knuckles looked pale. She wouldn't look at anyone. It gave me this gnawing feeling that she carried secrets we weren't ready to hear, or maybe ones she wasn't allowed to say out loud. Still, her silence made the situation heavier than his threats, because silence has a way of confirming the worst. We started holding quiet discussions in each other's living rooms after dark. No official meetings, just neighbors sitting on couches with cups of coffee, trading stories of every bizarre encounter. One family kept a log of every time Richard parked across their driveway. Another couple admitted he'd threatened to report them for trimming a tree. The more we compared notes, the clearer it became. His behavior wasn't random, it was systematic. He wanted control, and if he couldn't get it through intimidation, he'd get it through paperwork and fabricated rules. Eventually, someone suggested we start documenting everything together. Photos of his truck blocking driveways, recordings of his shouting, written logs with times and dates. It felt sneaky, like we were planning some underground resistance against a dictator. But the alternative was waiting until he did something irreversible. There was this undercurrent of dread at every gathering. What if the next blow-up wasn't just yelling or waving a gun, but an actual shot fired? Every parent in the cul-de-sac started keeping their kids indoors after sunset. The once friendly neighborhood where kids rode bikes in circles turned into a row of closed blinds and locked doors. One Friday evening, the breaking point arrived. Richard came home drunk, at least that's what it looked like, and started shouting at the Sanders family because their porch light was on too late. His voice carried through the cul-de-sac like a siren, and people cracked their blinds to watch. Then he slammed his truck door so hard it echoed, and I could see him fumbling at his waistband, like he was ready to show the gun again. Every parent grabbed their kids and pulled them back from the windows. This time, though, several neighbors called the police all at once, practically flooding dispatch with urgent pleas. When the officers arrived, Richard tried his usual act, calm voice, arms crossed, playing the misunderstood homeowner. But this time, something shifted. One neighbor had managed to capture the entire outburst on video from their second-floor window, audio included. The recording clearly showed him screaming threats while reaching for the weapon. Faced with undeniable proof, the officers had no choice but to detain him. For the first time in months, we felt like the balance had tipped in our favor, even if just slightly. Ellen stood in the doorway while they handcuffed him, her face pale but strangely still. When Richard was taken away, she finally stepped outside, clutching a sweater around her shoulders even though the air was warm. She didn't say much, just whispered a quiet thank you to the nearest neighbor before retreating back inside. That one word carried the weight of everything she hadn't been able to speak. Nobody pushed her for details. We just let the silence hang, respecting the fragility of the moment. After that night, the neighborhood slowly started to breathe again. Kids rode their bikes in the circle like they used to, and we even had a small block cookout a few weeks later to remind ourselves that community could outlast fear. Richard never came back. Word spread that he'd been forced to move after multiple charges piled up. Even now, though, when I sit on my porch and hear the distant hum of a truck engine, there's a part of me that tenses. It's a reminder of how quickly one person can poison a whole street, and how much it takes for ordinary people to stand together when the danger is right outside their doors. I still remember that afternoon so clearly because it started in the most uneventful way. I was 16, stuck at home while my parents worked late, killing time between homework and video games. Our apartment was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the muffled TV from the neighbors below. It felt like one of those long days where nothing ever happens, until the knock at the door broke the silence. I thought it might be a delivery or maybe a friend dropping by unannounced. But instead, it was the guy from down the hall. His name was Mark, and he looked flustered, almost sweaty. clutching his jacket like he was hiding something inside it. He asked if he could use my phone, said his cell had died and he needed to make a quick call. It didn't strike me as odd right away. He was a neighbor, someone I'd seen countless times taking the trash out or checking his mail. He always kept to himself, but that wasn't unusual in our building. I let him in, telling myself it would only take a minute. He stepped past me quickly, eyes darting toward the living room like he was checking if anyone else was home. I brushed it off, figuring maybe he was just embarrassed about asking for help. As he dialed, he kept shifting from one foot to the other, tapping his fingers against the counter. The call seemed short. I didn't hear him say much before he hung up. That's when the second knock came, harder, sharper, like someone pounding with urgency. My first thought was maybe another neighbor, but the voice on the other side shattered that idea. "Police, open up!" My chest tightened, and Mark's head snapped toward me. In one motion, he shoved the phone back on the counter and whispered harshly, "Don't say I'm here." Before I could process, he rushed into my bedroom and yanked open the closet door. I just stood there, frozen in disbelief as he squeezed himself inside, pulling the door shut behind him. A dozen questions collided in my head. Why the cops? Why my apartment? What had I just let in? The pounding at the door grew louder, and I realized I didn't have time to think. I opened the door to find two officers staring back at me, hands resting near their holsters, eyes scanning over my shoulder like they already knew what they'd find inside. The officers stepped inside without hesitation, their boots heavy against the worn carpet. One of them, taller and broad-shouldered, asked if anyone else was in the apartment. My throat felt dry, and I could only shake my head while trying to act calm. They split up fast, one moving toward the kitchen while the other made a straight line for the hallway where my bedroom was. I remember the sound of my closet door rattling as it was yanked open, followed by a shout that made every hair on my neck stand up. Mark was dragged out in seconds, thrashing and cursing, his jacket slipping off to reveal scratches down his arm, like he'd clawed at something earlier. The officer pinned him against the wall while his partner snapped cuffs around his wrists. I stood in the doorway, watching this surreal scene unfold in my own room. The neat stacks of books on my shelf, the posters on my wall, all suddenly looked strange with him pressed against them, snarling like an animal cornered. I couldn't reconcile the quiet neighbor from down the hall with the man being hauled out right in front of me. One officer stayed back to ask me questions, his tone firm but not unkind. He wanted to know how long Mark had been inside, if I knew him personally, if he'd said anything suspicious. I kept answering as best I could, stumbling over my words. All I could really explain was that he'd asked to use my phone, and I let him in because I thought it was harmless. The officer nodded, scribbling notes, then said something that sent a chill through me. "You're lucky. He's been running since this morning after assaulting someone 2 buildings over." When they finally marched Mark out, the hallway outside was lined with curious neighbors peeking through their doors. I felt exposed, standing there in my doorway with everyone staring. The officers gave me a final warning to always keep my door locked and be cautious, even with people I thought I knew. Once they left, the apartment felt unnaturally silent again, but not the comfortable kind. It was the kind of silence where every creak and shadow made me second-guess myself. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my room. The closet door still stood half open, and I couldn't shake the image of him crouched inside it, waiting. The next day at school, word had already spread. A couple of kids from the building lived nearby and must have seen the police cars, so by lunch I was already the center of whispers. People asked if I was scared, if I knew he was dangerous, if he'd threatened me. I kept giving the same answer. No, I had no idea. But deep down I replayed every little detail. How fast he moved past me, the way his eyes scanned my living room, as if the clues had been there all along and I'd just ignored them. That evening, my parents sat me down for a long talk. They weren't angry, but I could see the worry in their faces. My mom said that trust is a dangerous thing when you don't know someone well, and my dad kept shaking his head, repeating that I should never open the door when I'm home alone. They tried to make me feel better, but nothing really erased the image of officers dragging Mark out of my closet. his face twisted with rage, as if he hated me for letting them in. For weeks afterward, I couldn't walk down our hallway without feeling watched. Even after Mark was gone, locked up somewhere, I assumed, I caught myself glancing at neighbors differently, wondering who they really were behind closed doors. I'd lived in that building for years without thinking twice about the people around me, but one moment of misplaced trust turned the whole place into a stage for suspicion. The sound of footsteps outside my door at night made me hold my breath, waiting to see if someone would knock again. It's been years since that day, but I still lock every door behind me the second I come inside. Friends joke that I'm paranoid, but they don't know what it's like to have a fugitive crouched in your closet while the police storm your home. That was the moment I realized how quickly ordinary life can tilt into something terrifying, and how fragile the sense of safety really is. Even now, I can't open that closet without remembering the scrape of the hinges and the chaos that followed. That particular evening was quiet enough that I could hear the hum of my refrigerator from across the apartment. I lived in a modest one-bedroom, the kind of place you rent when you're more focused on saving than impressing anyone. My days were predictable. Work, gym, dinner, then either a book or mindless TV until I was tired enough to sleep. Nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen there, which was part of why I chose the place. The walls were thin, sure, but in a building like this, you learn to live with the occasional footsteps or voices leaking through from the neighbors. It was background noise, almost comforting in a way. The first time the banging happened, I was halfway through a late-night rerun. It came from the wall I shared with the apartment next door, sharp and uneven, like someone slamming a heavy object against plaster. My initial thought was that somebody was clumsy while moving furniture or maybe hanging something on the wall way too late at night. I muted the TV for a second, listened, then shrugged it off when it went quiet. In places like this, you don't overthink every noise, or you'll drive yourself insane. Days rolled into weeks, and nothing about that night seemed worth remembering until the landlord mentioned something odd. We ran into each other by the mailboxes, and he made an offhand comment about people complaining of domestic disputes in the apartment next to mine. He said it in a dismissive tone, like gossip he didn't want to be dragged into. But the words lingered with me. I had never heard shouting or anything that suggested a fight, just those occasional bangs that didn't fit neatly into any explanation. Then it happened again, this time more violent, more insistent. I was lying in bed, drifting off, when the wall rattled hard enough to make a picture frame tilt. There was no rhythm to it, just frantic pounding mixed with something else, low, muffled sounds that didn't register right away. I sat up, straining to separate the noises, and realized it wasn't furniture, and it wasn't random clumsiness. It was crying, quiet, stifled, almost swallowed by the walls, but it was there, carried through the plaster like a whisper no one was meant to hear. I stayed awake for hours that night, staring at the wall as if it might explain itself. Every so often the banging would start up again, followed by those muffled cries that sent a chill through me. I wanted to believe it was just an argument, maybe someone hitting the wall out of frustration, but the sounds didn't match that theory. They were desperate, drawn out, the kind of noises that make you realize someone is in trouble but has no way to say it out loud. Sleep never came easy after that. I found myself listening for it even on nights when the apartment was silent. The strange part was how normal everything seemed during the day. I'd pass neighbors in the hall, exchange nods or a quick, "Hey," and nothing ever seemed amiss. The guy who lived next door, at least the one I assumed was responsible, was a quiet man I rarely saw. Mid-30s maybe, a little disheveled. The kind of person who avoided eye contact and kept his head down. He carried groceries in reusable bags, smoked occasionally on the balcony, but never struck me as threatening. Still, the thought that those cries might have come from his apartment made me start paying more attention whenever I saw him. The noise escalated one Friday night. I had friends over for pizza and a movie, and halfway through the film, the pounding started again. My friends exchanged glances, whispering things like, "What the hell is that?" I tried to laugh it off, said something about thin walls and neighbors with bad tempers, but the tension in the room was obvious. The sound was relentless, echoing like fists slamming into drywall, until one of my friends muttered that it sounded more like someone was trying to get out rather than in. That comment lodged itself deep in my mind and refused to leave. After that evening, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I found myself hesitating by the shared wall, ear tilted toward the faintest noises, trying to piece together what was happening next door. Some nights it was quiet, eerily so, like the apartment was empty. Other nights, the banging returned with a force that shook my shelves. The crying would rise and fall, then cut off abruptly, leaving me staring into the dark, wondering if I should knock on his door, call someone, or pretend none of it was my problem. That tug of war between fear and responsibility became my nightly routine. One night, the pounding reached a level that felt impossible to ignore. It was close to midnight, and I was reading in bed when the wall shook so violently that dust drifted down from the ceiling. The cries were clearer than ever, not words I could understand, but pleading all the same. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over 911, but fear tangled me up. What if I was wrong? What if I ended up dragging myself into someone else's private mess? My pulse hammered in my ears as I sat there, caught between dialing and doing nothing, until suddenly the apartment fell into silence. Not a gradual fade, just silence as if someone had flipped a switch. The next morning, I noticed something strange. The blinds in the neighbor's apartment, usually half open with the faint glow of a lamp behind them, were drawn tightly shut. Later that day, while leaving for work, I realized his welcome mat was gone, along with the potted plant that had always sat by his door. The space looked stripped bare, like no one had ever lived there. When I asked the landlord about it, he simply said the tenant had moved out overnight. No warning, no notice, just vanished. His tone made it clear he didn't want to discuss it further. What unsettled me most wasn't the disappearance itself, but how abruptly the noise ended. For weeks, that banging and crying had been part of my nights, impossible to ignore. Then, in a single night, it was over, erased without explanation. I started second-guessing myself. Had I misheard, exaggerated the sounds in my own mind? But the tilted picture frame, the rattling shelves, even my friends who heard it firsthand, those things were real. Something had happened in that apartment, and it ended the moment he disappeared. To this day, I still find myself staring at that blank door whenever I walk past it, half expecting to hear the faint thud of fists against plaster again. No new tenant ever moved in. The apartment has stayed empty, at least as far as I can tell. Sometimes late at night I catch myself holding my breath, waiting for the silence to break. It never does, but the memory of those cries never really left.